Okay, Rose tells me it's time to go, so we will. Good afternoon. Welcome to the second in our seminar series of AI Institute Turing Network Development Award seminars. There's a number of them coming up over the summer, end of June, July. And today I'm very pleased to welcome what isn't Kirsty Whittaker, because she's on maternity leave. And who's worked on this for many years, I think. That's true. And Lee Steele and Vicky Helen behind me, who come here to talk to us today instead. I'll let them explain what it is, rather than trying to summarize it, because it's many things, I think, in many ways through the Turing. But it's very much about how research and processes of research can be done in new and perhaps better ways in the future. And Rose, who's standing outside, who's organised a lot of this, reminds me to remind you that there'll be some forms coming around for feedback on this, and also our survey of interest in AI across Kings that will also come to you. And if you haven't filled that in, please do, because we're trying to capture as many of those as possible before the end of June, beginning of July. Okay, so with that, over to you.
So we actually have, Vicky was meant to be here presenting with me today, but she's actually come down with COVID-19 over the course of the weekend. So she's presenting from home, very kindly is joining us remotely. But Vicky will actually be starting us off. Over to you, Vicky.
Great, yeah, this feels very, very 2022, very hybrid. So yeah, one speaker in person, one at home. I will just start my slides now. I hope you can see that all okay. So yeah, really thrilled to be here. And we're going to be talking about the Turing Way, a collaborative guide to data science and research. So just to start off and introduce ourselves. So I'm Vicky Helen. I'm a community manager based at the Turing Institute. And I work on the Turing-Roche partnership, which is a 5-year yeah.
And I have to cut you off real quick. We're not able to see your screen.
Oh, really? Oh, wait, hang on.
You can see you though.
Which is great.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Cool.
Yeah, so we'll continue. Yeah, so I'm working on the Turing-Roche partnership, which is a 5-year strategic partnership between the Turing Institute and Roche, exploring personalized healthcare. And then I'm also a core member of the Turing Way project. The Turing-Roche partnership is just at the start of its journey. So I'm looking at how best to bring reproducible practices into it, and also get industry involved in things like the Turing Way. And I will now hand over quickly to Anne to introduce herself.
Cool. For everyone online, I'll move a little bit to this side so I'm in the view of the camera. But I'm Anne. I'm another community manager based at the Turing Way, for this time based at the Alan Turing Institute, but at this time of the Turing Way. And it's really my role to steward contributions to the project in different sorts of ways. And I could be involved in, building the digital infrastructure of the Turing Way, but also developing shared best practices and collaborations with different researchers, academics, practitioners. It's really kind of meant to involve many different actors, and I'm entering the project at kind of a new stage after the founding by Kirsty Whittaker and your closest allies back in 2019, as Vicky will tell you more about, to the kind of second phase of the project that's happened over the past number of years that's seen its really accelerated growth, to kind of part 3 that's entering with actors like Vicky and I, where we're kind of trying to develop what is much more of a sustainable open source set of best practices. But you'll hear more about that in a second. Cool, back to you, Vicky.
Great. I'm now just going to open this up with Slido, hopefully. Hopefully this will load. Great. So yeah, before we got started with the talk, we actually just kind of wanted to know how familiar you are with the Turing Way. So if you go to slido.com and fill in this code here, or you can use the QR code. And you can vote in this poll. So we want to know if you haven't heard of it, if you have heard of it, but have not used the guide or engaged with the community, or if you have used the guide or engaged with the community.
Mickey, we should have prepared some music for these Slido slides.
I know, I feel like that would have been very hybrid organised of us.
Yes.
Also, Anne, I think people are just struggling to hear you when you're a bit closer to the screen. So I'm not sure where the mic is, but I think you might need to move slightly back to the screen.
Okay.
We're just waiting for people.
It should be. Okay, so maybe if I'm over here.
You talk at that screen.
Yeah. Okay, I'll talk at this screen. How is that? Is that audio a little bit better?
I think that sounds a bit better to me.
Okay. I will do my best to talk at this.
Yeah, people in the chat are saying that's a bit better as well. Okay, so looking at the poll, 63% of people, I'm not sure if you can see the results there, haven't heard of the Turing Way. So very, very apt that you're at this talk today. A third of people have heard of it, but have not engaged or with the project, and no one has used or engaged with the project. So really excited to kind of, present that today and hopefully get some of you guys involved. So I'll now just head back to the slides. There we go. Great. So before I get started and tell you a bit more about the Turing Way, I first wanted to give you a bit of a background on the Alan Turing Institute. So we established in 2015 as the National Institute for Data Science, and we added the AI part a few years later. And we have three main goals as an institute. So the first is advancing research. The second is training new generations to match the UK's needs. And the third is leading the public conversation on data science and AI through agenda setting research, public engagement, and providing expert technical advice to influence government, society, regulators, and industry. And at the heart of the Alan Turing Institute is really collaboration. As you might know, the Institute is made up of 13 university partners, so really a vast academic network. And we also have a number of strategic partnerships. So the one I work on, Roche, I mentioned on the right-hand side there. And we also collaborate on a project basis with a number of other institutional organizations. And then more recently, as I'm sure many of you now know about, we launched the Turing Network Development Awards, King's being one of these. And these are awards to 25 universities to help expand our network and link up with AI and data science communities across the UK. And as you can imagine, there's a breadth of research taking place across the Turing, as well as specific challenges we want to meet as an institute. We have about 10 research programs which are listed here. Some of these are sector specific, such as kind of finance, urban analytics, health and medical sciences. But we also have these 4 cross-cutting programs that help to enable the research going on at the institute, applying things like ethical frameworks, and also recognizing kind of societal implications. And what the Turing Way sits under is tools, practices, and there's a weird noise going on in the room. I'm not sure. I think that's maybe just someone not on mute. Anyway.
Back.
Yes, you're
good.
Pause for a second while we.
Yeah.
Okay, no worries.
Cool, you're back.
Yeah?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. So yeah, the Tools, Practice and Systems program, the ultimate aims of this program at the Turing Institute is facilitating research, establishing best practices, accelerating innovation, and democratizing access to data science and AI. And we do this through our core values of trustworthy systems, transparent reporting, inclusive interoperable design, ethical integrity, respectful co-creation, and leadership in open research. And the Turing Way sits across most of these values, which I'll now talk about. So what is the Turing Way? For us, it's a kind of Wikipedia put together by researchers and experts. And for us, it's really kind of 4 things at once. It's a book, it's a community where people come together to collaboratively write chapters, build and maintain resources, share their skills and ideas around best practices in data science and research. It's also somewhere where open source principles are applied in the development and the maintenance of this project. And it's also a collaboration, and this kind of process is the backbone of our project. So the aim with the Turing Way is to make collaborative, reusable, and transparent research too easy not to do. So the Turing Way started as a guide on reproducibility, but before I talk about this a bit more, we wanted to understand kind of what you associate with the term reproducibility and kind of what it means to you in your scientific discipline. So I will just open that up with Slido now. Hopefully that's working for everyone.
Yeah, it looks like it's okay with you.
Okay, so I think this should be a word cloud, so you should be able to put in kind of different terms that you associate with reproducibility. Yeah, that looks great. And I actually don't know, do you want to take a picture of this? I might do that as well.
Yeah, it would be great, though I'm not sure if you do a screenshot. Okay.
Yeah, I'll do one now. Yeah, it's really, really interesting to see kind of what's come through there. I like actually just the simplicity of science, and that science obviously should be reproducible, and that kind of key bit around transparency as well. So yeah, kind of getting similar results, repeating results, open data and things like that. So yeah, really, really interesting to see. Thank you. So if I just head back to the slides. Yeah, so for us, this kind of definition of reproducibility and this diagram is on one of the first pages of the Turing Way. And for us, we kind of define reproducibility as when the same analysis is applied to the same data, and it should give the kind of same result. So there are obviously other concepts around reproducibility, like replicability, when the same analysis is applied to different data or different experiments in different conditions. And then there's also terms that you might have heard of, such as robustness and generalizability. And for us, reproducibility in computational analysis should be maintained as a minimum criteria to ensure the quality and integrity of our research. And also for us, we think this concept should be considered throughout the life cycle of research, and it's what makes research more efficient. So many of you may have heard of what has been deemed the reproducibility crisis. Around the 2010s, it was discovered that a huge amount of published scientific studies were not reproducible, leading to a crisis in confidence of kind of science itself, really. As you can imagine, there's kind of huge consequences. And it was particularly high profile in fields such as psychology and medicine, but really it's pervasive across many scientific fields. And AI and data science is not exempt from this. Some recent headlines on the right-hand side there. And there's really a kind of range of causes for this, kind of often questionable research practices, often driven by the desire to publish in top journals. And with this push for reproducibility, you can really kind of see the link and the push with the open science movement, which I think many of you reflected on in your word cloud, that to improve trust and reproducible science, that we should also have kind of openness and transparency baked into the process. Sorry, I'm just coughing there a bit. So in 2019, in the context of this environment, with the reproducibility crisis and a push to openness, the Turing Way was started by Kirsty Whitaker, as Nick mentioned, who's the lead of the Tools, Practices and Systems program. And she really wanted a place to kind of share best practices about reproducibility and started to kind of gather like-minded colleagues. And this grew into an initial book, the book was really to kind of provide reproducible tools and practices to help different stakeholders in research know what their responsibility of reproducibility is and where they can make an impact. So Malvika is also now a co-lead of the project and a senior researcher at the TPS program. And she used to be a community manager of the project. And when she came aboard, she really kind of oversaw the expansion of the book and the kind of community. So in this expansion of the Turing Way, from an initial guide on reproducibility, was in order to recognize all of the things that enable open and reproducible science to happen in the first place. So the project added 4 more guides. In addition to the first guide, as I mentioned, we have guides for project design, communication, collaboration, and ethical research. And we also record all the community practices that we're developing and practicing within the Turing Way in our community handbook, so they can be adopted by other open communities. So with this, I think we've missed the poll for this one, actually. But I wonder if people could pop in the kind of Teams chat and maybe say in the group which guide they actually think, kind of just from the name of, would be the kind of most useful to their research. We're just interested, before I kind of give you a flavour of these, which ones of these you think would be most useful?
And maybe also for those in the room, if there's a guide that you're interested in, feel free to just shout it out as well.
Okay, so we've got one vote for project design in the chat. But I'll move on now and kind of just give you a flavour of the different guides. So yeah, as I mentioned, the first guide, so I'm going to give you a quick overview. So for each guide, contributors kind of document best practice, guidance and recommendations in chapters and subchapters, kind of describing various concepts and tools. So the guide for reproducible research is our first guide and still our biggest guide. So some of the chapters and the content we have in this guide are content around kind of open research, so open access, open data, things around kind of version control, research data management, and also kind of reproducible environments. And we also have the guide for project design. So the idea behind this guide is designing research projects by including different aspects of project management and development practices derived from academia and industry. So obviously a lot around kind of planning for project design and documentation, creating project repositories, also things such as pathways. So considering kind of who can contribute to your project and how, and also some content on kind of code styling. The guide for communication covers effective communication and research and various different ways you can do it. So from things like open scholarship and education to kind of specific mediums such as blogs, podcasts, posters, social media. And also this chapter kind of covers, this guide covers more kind of traditional communication. So making research outputs citable, things like software tools and data sets. And it also covers kind of academic authorship and peer review. And also there's a subchapter on kind of how to communicate in open source projects, such as tracking issues in a repository. The guide for collaboration also covers topics related to kind of effective and inclusive collaboration. This guide's got a lot of content on GitHub and how to use it for collaboration, which is actually what we use as the Turing Way itself. So Anne will be touching on that a bit later. So we've got kind of how to plan if you'd like to start a community, how you can build kind of best practices into this, such as teamwork and kind of valuing diversity and differences. We also have a chapter on leadership and data science, and a chapter on kind of research infrastructure roles. So here we're really highlighting the roles that allow research to happen and kind of build collaboration into research. So things like community managers, so mine and Anne's roles, data stewards, and also kind of research software engineers. So this chapter has a kind of description of these roles and also case studies, people talking about their kind of day-to-day work. And we also have a section on kind of remote collaboration, which you can imagine has expanded during the pandemic and become a lot more popular. And last but not least, we also have the guide for ethical research, which covers topics related to ethical aspects in data science, how to work in a way that maintains moral integrity and kind of high scientific standards, and also covers how research ethics committees work, kind of ethical decisions. And we also have a chapter on kind of activism for researchers, covering aspects like unions. And also a section where we invite you to reflect on your position in kind of data science and your kind of power and privilege as well. So that's the kind of flavour of the Turing Way overall. After this talk, we obviously encourage you to explore it a lot further. The book is very substantial, as you can see, but we really want to stress it's not meant to be read from start to finish, the same as kind of Wikipedia. What we suggest is starting with a concept, a tool, or a method that you kind of need now in your current work, and kind of browsing the different guides that make up the book, or you can use the kind of search function to search whatever you'd like to learn about first. And while we kind of asked you what guide you think would be the kind of most useful in your work, ultimately for us, the guides are just separated by findability, and we don't see them as separate. They're kind of all stops on the way to doing reproducible science. And as you can see, with this kind of huge amount of content, none of this work would be possible without our community of collaborators. Although the project is supported by the Turing funding-wise, we really see it as a Turing agnostic project. Anyone can get involved, and we really have a kind of diverse, we're really lucky to have a diverse international community. And with that, I'm now going to be handing over to Anne, who will be peeling back the lid on how this community functions, how the book is made, and how you can get involved. And I will save my COVID voice. Hopefully it was not too bad. So Anne, I'll hand over to you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Vicky. I'll try my best to direct my voice to the microphone, but please, if you can't hear me at any point, please let us know in the chat. Also, Vicky, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Given your COVID voice and your help, really appreciate it. But really, I now get to talk about the fun stuff, how the project is made. So really what we mean by, we've talked about a little bit about, the 5 guides that make up the Turing Way, but going beyond that to the processes that contribute to the book itself, it's really by what we call open by design and collaborative in practice processes. That means using, on one hand, open source tools and methods to collaborate on developing these best practices, but it also means developing open frameworks for collaboration that allow for peer production and project sustainability. This really means trying to develop something that's open all the way down and allows for and creates the kinds of spaces that allow for the development of a tool like the Turing Way. Next slide, please, Vicky. Cool. So we're actually, before going on to the next bit, if you could pull out a slide one more time, we're just curious to ask you all what your familiarity is with using tools like GitHub or Jupyterbooks. I say this because we've had many friends and allies join the project that may have, a PhD in physics, but over the course of their PhD was never exposed to GitHub. So this is not necessarily something that we're expecting anyone to use. And in fact, the whole point of a project like the Turing Way is that it introduces people to new skills and tools that they may not necessarily be exposed to or work with in their everyday work. Also very exciting to see that this crowd may be more familiar with both of these tools. Very cool, very cool.
I'm familiar with them, doesn't mean I like them.
Oh, that's true. Fair point, fair point. Cool, we'll just take.
It's already Yes, but
Yeah, totally.
simply disputing the tool-centric.
Yeah, I think maybe if we had another slide that says, how much do you enjoy using these tools, would be a very different ratio. Cool. Well, it was really interesting to hear those numbers because I think that one, if we have time at the end, maybe we can peek through the repository together. But what we mean by this is, of course, using kind of beginning and starting with open source tools. So that means, as Vicky said before, we host the entire project on JupyterBooks on GitHub, and most of the collaborative writing processes happen there, which is quite a different workflow than what, for example, GitHub usually normally used for. But it goes further than that. It means using licenses and permissions that allow for the resource to be shared and used openly. It also means documentation, not only of best practices that feed back into the book, but best practices that we use as a community in order to create the environment that allows for people to collaborate. And of course, all of these things allowing for better version control. It means, doing the maintenance work necessarily to install packages or dependencies in order to enable or to decrease the amount of friction needed to collaborate on GitHub. But there are also many other types of contributions that are possible, from reviewing and verifying the knowledge that people bring into the project, reporting and fixing bugs, and ultimately releasing the book as we do under a DOI on a biannual basis. Next slide, please. Cool, but all of these things are also very much enabled by the spaces that allow them to happen. GitHub is kind of the place, as I was saying before, where a lot of these debates about what happens and what should be put into the Turing Way really happen. But we also have a Slack repository or a Slack workspace where conversations happen about what should be put into the Turing Way, where connections are made across different geographies. We also host a number of events where people are able to gather in real time. And we find that that's actually really, really important to have that time protected throughout the week in order to be able to contribute part of your day or part of your working hours to a project like the Turing Way. So on Mondays every week at around 11 a.m. EST, we have an hour-long co-working session, which allows for contributors, for people interested in the project, people who want to see what's going on in the Turing Way, kind of stop by. And that happens on a remote basis. We also have collaboration cafes that happen on a bi-monthly basis. So two times a month, afternoons on Wednesdays, where people drop in to work on different chapters that they could be working on, PR that's been sitting for, say, a year on an idea that they had for another edition or a chapter in the book. I will plug that our next collaboration cafe is actually happening tomorrow, in case any of you want to drop by. And we'll have someone named Danny Garside stopping by, who recently brought the Turing Way into the Fediverse. We'll be talking a little bit about networked relations, which will be fun. We'll also be working on a couple of different applications for a number of conferences that we want to participate in and communities that we want to learn more from over the course of the year. And we really try and do all of this work out in the open and involve as many people as possible, because it's really about, again, openness all the way down. Book Dash is our biannual big contribution event, and we're really drawing upon this Wikipedia image of the Turing Way, because it's really gone from this one book into many other books. But the feature that everyone seems to use when they interact with the Turing Way is actually the search function, because there are so many things that are across all of these different guides that we have, that it really, in many ways, operates as a Wikipedia, kind of Wikipedia made by experts. And the Book Dash is kind of like an edit-a-thon or a hackathon that happens over the course of a week that, again, allows people to reserve a part of their working days to be able to contribute and collaborate with each other. And we just had one T-minus 3 weeks ago, which was really great. And on the last day of Book Dash, we have what are called community share-outs. Again, another place where people are able to share what they've been working on. But we also have fireside chats that happen on a monthly basis, usually around the last Friday of every month. And they're an opportunity to kind of build laterally across the ecosystem of projects that are working in open science and open source and open scholarship, to really see what are shared issues or shared concerns or shared questions that we may have. We've hosted sessions on everything from the importance of translation in open science and scholarship more broadly. We also hosted most recently a conversation about the importance or the difficulties and trade-offs in planning online conferences and hybrid conferences and in-person conferences. We also had one recently about the importance of supporting open infrastructure and infrastructure rules. And of course, had to drop in there that people are always sharing information with each other on our different social media platforms. Cool, Ricky? Great. So this is just a couple of images of historically events like Book Dash. And it looks like, okay, great. Historically, we did run our Book Dash events in person. You can see Kirsty right here in the corner. There's also Malvika and a number of other members of the team and contributors. They traditionally happened in person, but something very funny happened during the beginning of the pandemic lockdowns, was that it actually enabled us and enabled the project to venture into geographies and into communities and environments where we weren't normally able to go to. So now we have, most recently, we were able to collaborate across around, I believe, 5, 6 different time zones across the world, and that would not have been possible during the time of the in-person Book Dashes. Next one, Vicky. Cool. And we most recently actually piloted a hybrid attempt at a Book Dash, where we had hubs in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and also London at the Turing, of course, and at the Gene Golding Institute in Bristol. And thank you so much to Lena Kovoslava and Chintia Rao for kind of pushing forward for that very much networked hub model. And again, we're really all about trying to develop best practices that allow for that in-person interaction, but across these different networks that are only enabled by the online sort of format. On to the next one, Vicky. And had to drop in a couple of screenshots of our most recent community share out, which was a lovely way to share what everyone's been up to over the course of that whole week-long process. All right, next one. So really emphasizing here that there are many different pathways for getting involved with a project like the Turing Way, and there's really no one way. It could be seeing a talk like you all are today, right now. It could be participating in a fireside chat. It could be seeing a tweet about the project. It could be receiving a personal recommendation. Maybe using the resource for your own purposes, which could lead to you joining a community event or directly commenting on pull requests or a GitHub issue, which could lead you to eventually writing a chapter or collaborating with others on an idea that you have. There's really no one way, but whatever Vicky and I, for example, can do to really answer any questions about getting involved, it's really anywhere that you would like, and we're here to encourage you to get involved. Cool, that's the next one. So I talked a bit about developing and sharing the resource, sharing in a mix of your networks and a mix of your institutions, reviewing and updating the guides. But there are also many other different ways of getting involved, right? It could be everything from fixing broken links on the different guides that we have. Gosh, I can't even tell you the number of broken links we found and fixed, which is a great way of course, getting used to the GitHub workflow if you haven't been introduced to it before. But also, I want to stop here and emphasize the work of our translation team. We have ongoing translation of different chapters of the Turing Way, I believe in Spanish, in Arabic, in Japanese, Portuguese as well. And as of, I think, a couple days ago, we have a new translation team that's working on the translation into Turkish, which is incredible. And the work of the translation team, I can't even begin to describe how incredible it is, and how we're also trying to make sure that we're documenting their processes to ensure that it can be applied across other open source projects or to other communities. Really some amazing work, because it allows us, of course, to get beyond the bubble initiative. And finally, all of this, of course, is done with the aim of sharing best practices in data science and reproducible research more broadly. Cool. On to the next one. Great. And we wouldn't be talking about reproducible research, but of course, without talking about open science. So we have one more poll for you all to ask what you associate with the term open science. It could really be anything. And it should come up as a word cloud. Oh, should come up as a word cloud. it's very interesting to see the number of things showing up on here. I see a little bit of open access articles, of course, accessibility, accessible open access, citizen science, science open to every citizen. I see also broken science. It's definitely a term that's come up a number of times before. Western, definitely. Inclusive community, data availability. I'm gonna take a picture of this one as well, so we also have the copy of it.
I just took one as well. I don't know if you saw me doing my mum mobile. I'll go back to the slides now.
Cool, thanks. And it's really all of the terms that everyone is writing down is really interesting in part because something that Kirsty always brings up when talking about open science, but a way that's, of course, open science is often described as an umbrella, a wider umbrella term, right? Many, many, many other things. And that can include open scholarship, open access, preprints, etc. But it's also open data, data management, open source tools. It can also venture into community-led science, into using open educational resources, but also creating the environments that allow for the kind of openness that facilitates collaboration, right? Which definitely includes equity, diversity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. And so the Turing Way really, both in its foundation and in its very core, with Kirsty and her allies, also in the various stages that the project has gone through, really aims to contribute to that wider umbrella of open science and open scholarship. But what's really core to this is the community and the contributors that create the project and make it what it is. And really drilling this in part because it's so core to everything that we do. And you might have noticed that I've named a couple of people over the course of the talk. And that's really because we don't have any single author associated with the Turing Way. What we do have, however, is a contributor record. And so that's a place where really many members of the community write down what they've been working on, how they've been involved, small biographies. And I will drop that this page or this contributor record has been used as like a citation by early career scholars and by people's proof of work and they've been involved in their labs. So it plays a very, very practical role as well because it enables people to highlight their work in a public setting, and we do our best to uplift that as much as we can. Next slide, please. Another fun thing that we do actually also on the GitHub repository is we install this thing called the All Contributors bomb, which enables us to edit our contributor records to enable and acknowledge all different types of contributions. So it could be everything from fixing a typo to fixing a bug to installing a package to getting involved with the digital infrastructure to writing a chapter, writing content. And we really think that again, this openness all the way down, these structures that enable contribution at every step are really trying to help us move away from this single sense of authorship that is so prevalent in the academy to a wider kind of acknowledgement of the network of contributors and the network of structures that enable research to happen, enable good work to happen in the first place. And a small plug here actually is really to check out the research infrastructure roles chapter that was written by Ariel and that kind of very much tries to build upon this model of contributors and what that looks like within the institution. Next slide, please.
And I know you're looking at the screen, but I would turn background slightly just because you're getting slightly fainter.
Yeah, I'm getting too caught up in it, Vicky. Thanks.
I'm like, don't look at the screen, just look at.
Yeah,
just look
all right. Because I'm also looking at people. We're making eye contact. All right. Also, of course, all these best practices are documented in the community handbook, which you should definitely check out because it's meant to be a resource that others can use as well within open source, within collaborative projects. Again, really trying to put everything out there in the open and in the public domain. Next one, please. Ultimately, it's all with the aim of kind of meeting you where you are. Again, like we said so before, though, it sounds like a very literate group in terms of using GitHub and Jupyter Books. It's really just more about joining the community, learning a new skill in the process, sharing your skills and your expertise, collaborating with others, mastering others. any kind of contribution that you're interested in bringing to the project. We really would love to hear from you and have a lot to learn from you for sure. Next one. We wouldn't be finishing of course, a presentation about reproducible research and a project that tries to enable reproducible and open research without acknowledging that there are barriers. And we know that the reward system, the academy, the pressure to publish novel findings, the cost of publication, of course, as well as the cost of training and skill transfer, as well as leadership, institutional barriers, and the lack of trust associated with these processes, or the lack of trust associated with putting things out into the open, can really put a pressure or form a barrier to doing research more reproducibly or openly. But really think that it's time for a cultural shift. And the Turing Way, in so many ways, tries to be a part of that shift by embodying these values at every step. And we can only really shift that culture of research and shift that culture of science together. And really going to channel my inner Kirsty here when I'm talking about this slide here. Because, of course, open science being that kind of umbrella term that we talked about previously, it can be quite overwhelming, I think, for a lot of people, where they feel as if they have to use everything openly all the time, all open source. The entire infrastructure of a project that you work on has to embody all parts of open science. And the way that Kirsty tends to describe it is she's like, think of open science as a buffet. You have, a little bit of research data management here, you have a little bit of open access here, a little bit of research infrastructure, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and take what you need for your project. Take what you need for what you're working on in that moment. Take part in the buffet of open science. Don't worry about eating all of it at the same time, but start where you are and take possible steps to work in the open and ask for feedback and for help where you can, because it's a step-by-step process and you'll learn the more you do. Next one. And just to drill it down, because it's so core to the project as a whole, we really believe that this collaborative process is what has enabled the project to grow so much over the course of a relatively small amount of time. People tend to forget that the Turing Way has really only been around for 3 years or so, but now it has over 200 live chapters, and we are always trying to develop community resources, develop events, guidance, templates, and training that others can use that are available openly. We have over 325 direct GitHub contributors. So 325 experts, researchers, practitioners, policymakers, people involved in very different elements of the project, and thousands of people that see it every day. A couple of days ago, I grabbed this screenshot at the bottom of the number of people that have downloaded the Scriberia images that are you've seen throughout the entire presentation. Those illustrations are all freely available and in the public domain. Feel free to use them. They're meant to be stolen. They're meant to be used for your presentations. They're distributed all throughout the project. They're also available on Zenodo. We really encourage people to. So if you get anything out of this talk, it's that you have images that you can use for your next presentation. Cool. And going a little bit beyond this, I guess, impact of the images that I've shared with you all, but also the project itself, we really want to point out that it kind of goes beyond the culture of research to the wider culture more broadly. The Turing Way was recently featured in the Goldacre Review, which was an independent project pursued by Ben Goldacre at the University of Oxford about the use of data in the use of health data in research and healthcare environments. We were used as a key case study in being able to use data openly and ethically. Really, really great and amazing to see our work kind of being featured, or the work of our community being featured at the national level. We were also a highly commended project in the Hidden Ref competition, and the Hidden Ref is all about recognizing non-traditional research outputs. We were really lucky to be featured in that. But kind of as it shows you, the Turing Way really as a project and as a community aims to find its impact, of course, at the policy and national and even international levels. And we've really quite organically seen that happen over the past number of years. Next slide. Cool. So, love to get you all join in on the collaborative process, learn skills, methods, practices, contribute what you can. Should have added a picture of that thing here to make sure I filled in that image. On to the next one. Cool. Feel free to comment on a PR or an issue. Join our Slack workspace, can share the information for those that are here. We'll also share some of the links in the chat as well. You can join that link, which will, if you go to the bit.ly link, it should also show you a couple of resources easily accessible about the project. Next one with me. And a bit more information about the community events that are upcoming. Again, we'll plug Collaboration Cafe is happening tomorrow afternoon. Yeah, we'd love to see you at a community event in person or online. And next one. Thanks again to our community of contributors and users. Again, Vicky and I are the ones speaking to you, both remotely and in person today, but we really, really want to emphasize that the Turing Way wouldn't be possible without the hundreds of people that have contributed to this project over the past number of years. And we're just happy to be highlighting the work of the community. I think that's all we have for you this afternoon. Thanks so much. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, I saw a question.
Really fascinating, this open source data. One question about what you would say to a shape institution that we should not share this project. What would you say? And I can say, please.
This is where I think the image of open science or open source being a thing that you can customize for your own context is really important. I say this as an example. We have a core member of the organizing team of the project who's involved in a COVID data, who's involved in a COVID data related project. And as she has tried to, bring in concepts for the Turing Way, bring in open source tools, she's really wondered, this doesn't work because none of this is going to be out in the public domain. This isn't going to be public facing. And we took a couple steps back, and instead she realized, oh wait, what actually works for my context would be using an internal wiki, for example, that enables collaboration internally, but isn't necessarily public facing. You can use an open source tool within your project while it's not released publicly, like public, so uploaded online. It could be using open source tools internally within your team. And I think people tend to, again, take this kind of all or nothing approach to open source, where they're like, everything is open or the none is open. But I think the way that, at least in the way that we've tried to talk about it within the project, is maybe say, hey, we can try and customize something and help you create something that works for your context, your project. And bit by bit by bit, as people learn to trust those systems, they might increasingly inch more and more towards openness, eventually towards, say, fully open source tools. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, but what I meant is something that can be convincing them to follow this new way of sharing data, because it's always a problem of authorship for the institution, and it's not easy to turn the way they used to publish this, I think, wonderful way of every kind of research, because it's something that everyone can use. So the problem comes from all-shaped institutions to me, not to us as researchers involved in publishing and disseminating our data.
Yeah. I think you're maybe asking, how do we change the world in general? Which I'm all for it.
We are all for it in our own institution, I think.
No, definitely.
But, I was asking to something practically useful for convincing all-shaped institutions.
Well, I think one tactic that's used, I think, is the efficiency model. Reproducible sort of tools that allow for reproducible research may require a lot of work upfront, for example, to create those environments that make it easier for you to reproduce your results. However, the incentive structures are not built to do a lot of preliminary work, even though it makes your life easier in the long run. So the efficiency argument is usually what we use for setting up reproducible computational environments that will save you work when you're going through peer review. So I think efficiency is something that we always talk about as a very practical tactic for encouraging the use of open source tools. But on another kind of side of things, another thing that we tend to talk about, and Vicky, feel free to chime in here, would love to hear how you think about it as well, especially given your project. But we also talk about the need for public trust, especially during the current political era that we are in, and how open source, open science, open tools are very much a part of the wider discourse of technology right now. And if you're not participating in that conversation, if you're not participating in using those tools, it could actually very practically have detrimental effects on funding opportunities or publishing opportunities, etc. So it's kind of like it seems to be happening anyways. Are we going to participate in it, or are we going to try and perpetuate culture, the research culture as per usual? Yeah, again, probably both of those. Maybe not the most. They're shooting for the sky a little bit, but I guess that's at least what we aim to do. What would you say in that context if you were advocating for a shift?
I agree with you totally, but something coming from a new way of thinking about your research, because my own institution, I'm an Italian, so I'm coming from a big pediatric hospital in Rome. We have a scientific directorate that is strongly based on having our patients the name of the institution. So to me, it's always important to look at new ways that could be affordable, one, and also transparent and open to everyone. I think that we need to move this way. Absolutely. We in the future do not have any scientific tool not published, because you have all open access with everything. So it's a revolution, a complete revolution in the scientific field. And I agree with this idea, because it's more open to public involvement and to everyone that can use research.
And we actually can't hear what the person in the room is saying, so I don't want to interrupt. But we have a couple of questions online, but I don't know if you just want to finish that one off.
How about this would also be great, I think, to maybe bring to the room, or maybe an informal setting after the talk. So maybe, Vicky, if you want to maybe address some of those questions in the chat while we have everyone in this hybrid format. Thank you.
Yeah, Mateus, I think, has their hand up online.
Yeah, can you hear me?
You're quite quiet.
Yeah.
I can't hear you on my side now. I don't know if you can in the room.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, sorry. I did that.
Do you want to type your question in the chat, and then we can do it from there? In the meantime, maybe we could do Dave's question. I don't know if you can see that in the chat, and if you just put that up on the screen.
Yeah, I'll read it out real quick. So on the subject of open science, we have a collaboration with the university, not King's, where the academics were very open until the university legal department got involved. Do you see a conflict between openness and the IP frameworks universities are used to working with? Vicky, maybe because I was answering the question before, do you want to go for this one?
Yeah, sure. I think this is a very good point. I think openness often is, I mean, it's not fast paced, but it's ahead of the curve. And I think often, I think particularly with kind of IT systems, I know it's kind of a legal one, that often that understanding of what GitHub is often hasn't caught up with the kind of frameworks, like you said, that are in place with universities. So I think that's a really, really good point about making sure that you explain kind of why you're doing something, why it actually kind of will bring benefits to the institutions as well, I think is always helpful. But yeah, I definitely think that conflict exists. And I don't know if you want to add any more. That wasn't that helpful in terms of solutions, but yeah, I think we've seen that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, again, it so often boils down to what works in your context and what you're working on. Because, I mean, we definitely see the variety of institutions that people contributing to the Turing Way, wanting to develop similar projects or adopt similar methods, but sometimes find restrictions in the security of the devices that they use or what's allowed by their own institutions. And again, I think it's really about maybe customizing it to your context. And realizing that slowly over time, you know, as more and more people are doing as open as trying to be as open as possible and as closed as necessary, which is usually a phrase that's used to describe the importance or what implementing openness really looks like in real time, then slowly, bit by bit by bit, you're able to make those shifts within your own institutions and IT departments.
If you want to patent anything, it can't be open in any way. And that's a challenge because everything has to be locked down. So I think there will be an IP issue somewhere in there for IT systems. What I was going to say though was I suspect, having talked to Kirsty, that some of this is founded on the idea of open source being good. And I would question that because most open source packages I use are quite flaky. And commercial packages I use are faster and more reliable. And I think open science is a very good umbrella to talk about things. But underneath it, there's lots of things like even kings can't compete with Google on the hardware costs, right? So we can't do open science in the same way that Google can, or not open science in Google's case. But so I think reproducibility is a scientific thing that all papers should have. And the question is, that you must be teasing out in many different ways is what that really means.
Oh, definitely. Reproducibility takes on so many different forms, for sure. But going back to what you were saying about that tension, I think between proprietary and open source, really encourage you, if you haven't already checked out the 2ITC project. It's very fascinating because the way that they recognize that they're in direct competition with commercial proprietary computational environments, and they're like, in order to be able to create an open source solution that works for universities, we need to be able to compete on the UX UI side of things, or else we won't be able to play. And so yeah, I mean,
and you choose to go for the commercial solution and you make something else the open science answer.
Yeah.
Because there's quite a lot of very good commercial solutions around. What's wrong with them?
I think it's, if I were to answer, I think for myself, and Vicky, I'd be very curious how you would respond to this too, especially with the health data related projects that you're working on. I think it really depends on your environment, because I think when it comes to a movement like open source, if you look at the history of the movement within software, it's kind of that radical approach, the free part of free and open source, that really pushed for practices that weren't necessarily, that were kind of antagonistic to the market forces at play. And so in order to shift the culture, they needed to have this approach that was kind of in many ways an all or nothing. But if we're talking now at this like inflection point for open science and open scholarship, where you're having conversations about open science happening at UNESCO now, which speaks to a much wider reach of the concept, right? But that inevitably will lead to a kind of breakage in a way of the nuances of reproducibility in different contexts, or the way that a lot of people who advocated for open science at the beginning were very, very strong, free and open source software advocates. So inevitably, it's going to water down a bit, which means that it leaves room for more, of course, proprietary solutions in different contexts. For me, myself, I would love to have an open conversation about what tools you all use, because I think this is something that's really come up in a lot of conversations with people that are part of this movement, and honestly a part of projects like the Turing Way, for whom open source means much more than a piece of software. It's an idea of using something free and openly available. Yeah. I don't know if there's anything you want to chime in, Vicky.
Again, I couldn't quite hear the question, but I think was it about I think the framing of open source is good and kind of closed source is bad is definitely, yeah, I feel like it's almost like a bad rap that open science has got, and I don't think that's kind of like the framing that many people would agree with, because I think, for example, I always use the example of the FAIR guidelines for data, so kind of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But actually, you can have a data set that is completely closed but complies with the FAIR guidelines. But people often kind of conflate that FAIR must mean open. And I think you can obviously have a lot of things that are closed and are still following very kind of good best practices. So I think that's an interesting kind of push and pull between the two. But I think also the issue of kind of commercial often being better is obviously kind of the resources and the support it has. So I think that kind of push for making sure kind of open source projects are kind of maintained, and often that kind of funding is obviously hard to come by, but I think that's something we kind of feel is important. I know it's kind of going over time, but I think Matthias typed their question in the chat, which I think is, so I don't know if you just want to answer that one before you guys have your discussion in person. I think you can see that on the screen there. Yeah, I would say that is so tricky. It's something me and Anne have come across many times. And I mean, my first advice is always trying to tell people the benefits. It sounds like kind of something you've tried to do. But I think, yeah, kind of that phrase of meeting people where they are. And if you can kind of convert 1 or 2 people, I would count that as a win. I mean, there's definitely, we've all had in our projects at the Turing, we all have kind of open repositories, but there'll be a kind of PI who will be like, yeah, can you just send it in a Word document? And sometimes you've kind of got to pick your battles and be like, okay, I'll download that off the repository and send it to you in a Word document. Yeah, I think in terms of advice, that's a really tricky one. Anna didn't really answer the question, but I don't know if you had.
I wonder if they would enjoy, well, one thing that a mechanism that I've tried to use is someone that actually comes from the social sciences. Trying to get people to use GitHub is always a challenge. And I end up recommending other resources or other groups that are working on, that host GitHub workshops. So kind of deflecting them to different communities that are already kind of developing those resources, like the Carpentries, like Elixir, I believe, runs. There's a number of resources that we'd be happy to send your way. And it's funny because there's always 1 or 2 people that go to a workshop about GitHub and come back just like totally overwhelmed with new information, but then start to integrate it into their workflow in very interesting and different ways. So oftentimes, again, I feel like community is often a gateway into that desire to learn skills or tools that they might not normally be exposed to. Yeah. Cool. I guess we're at the end of time.
Yes, we've got coffee and cakes now for those in the room. Sorry, Vicky.
Sorry, Vicky. But thanks so much for joining us online. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, and sorry I couldn't join in person. Please have a cupcake on my behalf.
All right.
You can probably close. Sorry.